everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. I've just been looking down at everyone's flags. I didn't know you could do flags emoji and finding out where you're all tuning in from. So we've got people from all over the place. So welcome to everyone today to this seminar. And our topic today is how to integrate sustainability, I'll just put my teeth in, sustainability into supply contracts. And this seminar today is kindly supported and sponsored by Salesforce. So more from them a bit later. So you've all found the chat. That's great. Carry on with that conversation, make some new connections, find out connect with people on LinkedIn afterwards. So make sure that you keep those relationships going and get to know people from our wider procurement community. It's great that so many of you are joining from so many areas across the world. So welcome to everybody. Also, we want to make this session as interactive as possible. So make sure that you use the Q&A session just at the bottom there, the button there, to submit your questions. I'll try and get through as many as possible. So try and get them in nice and early. I'll be prompting you a little bit later as well before we start our panel session. We've got a great panel for you today, and I'll be introducing those people to you a little bit later on. So these seminar series are all recorded, so you can listen back again, or you can share them with your peers, go back and make your team watch them if you found them interesting and you think there's something useful that you can use. So you can listen back on demand at any time, and they'll be available on YouTube, and we'll send you the link to those later. They're all part of a wider seminar series, so we'll also share the link of how you can join others in our series too. We've got some great topics coming up. So without further ado, I would like to invite on Patrick Flynn from Salesforce. So Patrick is Vice President of Sustainability at Salesforce. So perfect person for us to talk about this discussion today. So I'll just let Patrick turn his sound on, and we'll start having a bit of a chat. So thanks, massive thanks to Salesforce for supporting this event today, and welcome, Patrick. I mean, you've got a well-established background in sustainability, Patrick, and I know that Salesforce, it's something that's really close to the ethos behind your organisation, and something that you're really a driving force for you all. You led on the Salesforce environmental strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your role and some of the things you've been involved with?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. It's so great to see all of the corners of the earth represented from this attendee list. Pleasure to be with you all, and my sincere hope is to be helpful to everyone here. So indeed, drop questions, comments into the chat, and I look forward to the Q&A session at the end. Salesforce is a company built on our values. We started the business 20 plus years ago, and at that time made a new business model, made a new technology model, and a new philanthropic model. The 1-1-1 model, where 1% of employee time, 1% of product, and 1% of equity go to nonprofit causes. And now me, 20 plus years later in my role, get to benefit from a company culture very much committed to business as a platform for change. And we've been able to use that to make great strides in our environmental strategy. We've reached net zero across our full scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. We're 100% renewable. We've got a 1.5-degree science-based target, including some interesting things in supply chain engagement that I'm sure we'll get into. All of our products are delivered on a carbon neutral basis. And yet we know in this climate emergency, we need so much more from any leader out there. And so our aim is much, much bigger. We aim to accelerate the world's largest businesses to net zero themselves, to sequester 100 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere by conserving, planting, and restoring 1 trillion trees on Earth, protecting and restoring our oceans, and igniting an ecopreneur revolution, supporting all of those bright-eyed innovators out there who know that the planet needs their brilliant help right now. Me and my role, I consider myself an employee of planet Earth, and I think about all of the tools that Salesforce offers for me to bring to that job each day, everything from our operational design to our influence, our technology, really trying to think about the broad array of tools that we can use to meet a planet very much in crisis. And my personal journey is a bit of a meandering one, like so many in this field. from engineering to clean tech venture capital, running a team of data scientists at a data center company, and now leading the environmental strategy for Salesforce, all in pursuit of marrying my skills and my passion with what the planet needs right now in this moment.
Fascinating role, and yeah, I've watched with great interest with some of the great work that Salesforce has done. So you can really tell that culture comes out in the organization. What are some of the most forward-thinking businesses that you work with doing, and what are they doing to be at that forefront and driving business practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the most leading companies on environmental strategy right now are first and foremost focused on climate change. Climate is not even just about environment. It's also the best way to deliver equality and political stability and economic resilience. And yes, of course, environmental impact as well. So the leaders are really recognizing the urgency of climate action right now, 2021 on planet Earth. They're also asking themselves really three fundamental questions. What is it that we do? What's our reason for being as a company? And how can we make that a force for positive good in the world? Number two, how are we doing it? What are our full value chain impacts in executing that strategy upstream within our operations and downstream as well? And third and finally, what's our influence? Whether that's over employees, our suppliers, our customers, regulators, the investor community, how are we using our voice and our influence to ask for and say the right things to catalyze systemic change around us? One of the companies that comes to mind is MasterCard. They're a customer of Salesforce Sustainability Cloud, and they've got ambitious goals across their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions as well. They've got a 100 million tree pledge, just like Salesforce does. But they're also really focused on their core technology, their core reason for being, in recognition of the fact that they've got billions of cardholders around the world who are making individual decisions every single day. And they're trying to find ways through Salesforce technology to have the right greenhouse gas emissions put in front of that customer at the right moment in time in order to catalyze change that's far, far bigger than even their own full operational impacts.
Excellent. Good work. And why do you think it's more important than ever that procurement teams are able to effectively integrate sustainability into supplier contracts?
Yeah, and I look forward to sharing more about what we're doing there, I'm sure, a little bit later. The reason is the era of any company, any brand being judged only on its four walls of operations is completely over.
Yeah.
We're now firmly in an era of, in greenhouse gas parlance, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, which maybe we ought to get into. Scope 1 and 2 really are within a company's operational control. Scope 3 are upstream and downstream impacts. Just a few years ago, I think it was reasonable to really be championing scope 1 and 2 goals related to operational footprint. And like I said, that's over. And so now any company is, their reputation, their risks, their opportunities is completely tethered to that of their supply chain, all of their suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers on and on upstream, as well as how their customers are using their products and technology, their downstream impacts as well. So with that shift, the role of the procurement team, the actions related to communicating your values up to your suppliers through your purchasing policies, your purchasing decisions, your relationship with your suppliers emerges as completely central to a company's strategy for climate action.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. That was really interesting. And I'm going to invite our other panelists to join us now, and we'll go through some more questions. But just another reminder to you, the audience, please remember to put some questions into the Q&A box, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So, Patrick, I'm going to invite our fellow panelists along. So we have Jennifer Ramos, Head of Content Development at Chancery Lane Project. and Matt Swindle, who's CPO at Britvic, and Matt is also on our CIPS procurement power list this year. So welcome and thanks for joining us. Jennifer, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about you and your role?
Sure. For anyone who doesn't know what the Chancery Lane Project is, we're a collaboration of legal professionals, essentially, that draft climate clauses for inclusion in contracts. But it's not specifically and only for lawyers, it's for anyone that wants to use those clauses. So really addressing exactly what Patrick's been talking about, getting those Scope 3 emissions addressed. And so what we do is we bring together, we convene lawyers to draft the clauses, and then we get them peer reviewed by other lawyers. And then we get the clauses out there and hopefully get them into use. And Salesforce has actually used some of them, so which is very exciting for us.
And Matt, you joined Britvic, was it last year? I think you joined, didn't you? Midway through a pandemic.
14 months ago now.
So yeah, interesting time to join.
Yeah, so firstly, Emma, thanks for the invite and the opportunity to take part on today's panel. It's an area I have a lot of passion about. Prior to joining Britvic, I spent 23 years with the Coca-Cola system. So as you can imagine, sustainable business practices sort of hardwired into their operating model. So it's one of the things I took with me from that time to Britvic. So really pleased to join the panel today.
Wow, very welcome and thanks for joining everyone. So I want to start with are businesses and their supply chains doing enough to accelerate their efforts really to tackle the climate crisis? And Patrick, I don't know if you want to take that one first.
Sure, thanks. You know, I think any question that has to do with is blank doing enough for the climate crisis? You know, with the emergency we find ourselves in, the only answer is yes, so long as they are doing everything they can, right? It is code red, all hands on deck, pull on every lever that you can as hard and as deftly as possible. If I think about supply chain procurement, engaging with suppliers, just a few years ago, I didn't even dream we would be this far along. So that's the greatest source of optimism for me. Back in 2018, we set our science-based target. The Scope 3 component of it was that suppliers representing 60% of our Scope 3 emissions would set science-based targets of their own by 2024. We're already halfway there, and movement has been really incredible to watch. And it's a little bit of a domino effect. Once a few companies say that they really want their own suppliers to set science-based targets, all of a sudden the pressure comes from multiple angles. You topple one of the next dominoes and they're on the team as well, trying to push their own suppliers. So the momentum is fantastic. Like Jennifer pointed out, we also took it a step further earlier this year. We, in Earth Month, we notified all of our suppliers that effective immediately, climate would be part of all standard purchase agreements from Salesforce going forward. And it's a 4-page legal appendix that is published for all to use, to take, to improve, to provide feedback on. And it requires them to set science-based targets, disclose their Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions to us, have continuous improvement plans, deliver all their products and services on a carbon neutral basis, all things that Salesforce is already doing for all of our customers, by the way, but they need to do that or pay. And to my knowledge, it's the first of a toothy legal contract that really codifies the demand for climate action, makes it unequivocally clear where we want our full supply chain to go. And we really are thinking about it as first and foremost a call for collaboration right now to understand where things are easy, where things are hard, what suppliers are able to do, and catalyze them to ask their own suppliers for climate action. The idea being that we can send a signal up to the parts of the economy where fossil fuels are being burned, where cement is being made, where the ground is being tilled, and make it really clear that things need to change and understand where it's easy and where it's hard. So I'm both incredibly inspired by how quickly all of this has ramped up. If I reflect back just a few years, and very much deeply aware that we have so much still ahead of us to change.
Excellent. Matt, how about you? What's your sentiment on how quickly things are going and moving in the right direction?
Look, I think this is a big, complex, dynamic area, and that dynamism, things change from hour to hour, day to day, and the challenges get greater. But I think it's about collaboration, and everything that Patrick just described will not happen without collaboration. And I think through that collaboration, businesses need to prioritize on those things where they think they can have greatest impact. And if we look specifically at Britvic as an example, so we are a beverage manufacturing business, and we have a fairly large carbon footprint. And most of that carbon, roughly 90% of it, is consumed in our inbound or generated in our inbound supply chain. So that's clearly where we're going to focus first, because it's where we think we can have the greatest effect. And clearly, we've made science-based targets, and I think a science-based target that exists 1 year, that too is going to have to be dynamic because of the speed at which things are tending to change. And I think it's important for businesses to stay on top of the news and make sure that the targets that they set continue to be relevant, and where they're not relevant, that they continue to adapt and change and evolve. And another area that we're acutely conscious of at the moment is the amount of plastic bottles that we produce as a business. And we've made an ambitious commitment, and that commitment is that we will recycle 100% of our PET bottles by the end of this calendar year. And we also recognize that in making that commitment, that recycled plastic is not infinite. It is fairly finite, and therefore we're going to have to innovate, and we're going to have to bring in new technology to help us find other ways of recycling plastic waste and turning them back into bottles. So, I think it's a fairly comprehensive challenge that is going to require broad collaboration to solve.
Yes, it's certainly the elephant in the room, and it's in that sense it's so big, and I think organizations are probably struggling of knowing where to start, really. But someone once said to me, with an elephant in a room, pick a leg and take a bite of it. You've got to start somewhere, you can't go wrong. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on how the pace of work and sentiment is going on?
Thanks, Emma. We basically know we aren't doing enough. I think we all know that. And we need a shift in thinking that puts climate as a critical consideration in tendering, along with cost and delivery, so that it embeds climate action into every element of a business. And we talk about collaboration between organisations, but we also need that collaboration within organisations. So staff at all levels and in all departments need to understand the action required, both in terms of understanding their organisation's role in ambitious net zero target setting, but also what they should be doing to implement that, including working across those departmental boundaries. So the lawyers need to be talking to the sustainability professionals, who need to be talking to the procurement professionals, and they all need to be on the same page and helping each other. But then also, as has already been said, partnering with other organisations in this is also critical. So large and sophisticated organisations like Salesforce and Britvic can invite their suppliers to attend their education and training programmes that they're giving their staff, and that helps the smaller organisations as well.
Excellent. And on that, so how can procurement professionals ensure that they place binding commitments upon suppliers to combat climate change in a way that is both rigorous and appropriate for supplier size?
So procurement professionals, as I've said, need to understand the emissions reductions that are required across the whole organisation, and then those need to be broken down into percentage targets per contract, because the organisation needs to decide how it's going to achieve those targets and how that breaks down across different contracts. So which are the key suppliers that are most important to focus on, and where is each supplier on its net zero journey, and what support does it need to help it to ensure that the burden is fairly shared in order to achieve a just transition. So the problem is that SMEs don't have the capacity or capability often to do some of this without investment. And you talk about elephants in rooms. The elephant in the room there is that in order for suppliers to supply goods and services in a way that combats the climate emergency, they probably need to be paid more and upskilled. And that doing that is investing in everyone's future. So you need to have an open and honest and frank conversation about what help suppliers might need in order to get there, and then decide on what's a fair and reasonable cost that they'd be willing to pay, in the same way that you pay for health and safety or living wages or similar initiatives. And then in terms of binding commitments, you need to make sure that you use well-drafted climate clauses, like Patrick referred to, with teeth, and if possible, get some input from the in-house lawyers or legal advisors. I mean, if maybe a lot of procurement professionals might not need that help because they're used to contracting, but if necessary, get some help. But as I say, there's no point in having those legally binding clauses if they can't be complied with, because they're not practical, and then the carbon won't come out either way.
Excellent, thanks. Patrick, how do you kind of ensure that you've got these commitments, these binding commitments from suppliers?
I think the partnership with the procurement team and the legal team is worth underscoring. None of what we've been able to do would have happened without having employees in those teams with sustainability in their job titles, with sustainability in their responsibilities, thinking about how they use the levers around them to create the change that we're after. And so it's the internal collaboration is essential. And one of the things I've learned in the process of working more closely with the procurement team is what an art there is to working with suppliers on the journey of those suppliers.
Matt, I think we'll pick up where with you now on joining, how you are building those relationships with suppliers at lots of different sizes and levels, and how making those commitments binding. How is that going for you at Britvic?
Yeah, so I'll pick up on the thread of what Jennifer and Patrick were saying. So practically speaking, as Jennifer has said it, for us it's about identifying those suppliers that are the biggest contributors to our carbon footprint within our inbound supply chain, and then about collaborating with them to build out their targets and their roadmaps to reduce their own carbon footprint. And then it's about incorporating those goals and objectives into contracts. And as Jennifer said, it's about putting some teeth around some of those clauses. So yes, it's about collaboration, but it's also about ownership, commitment, and delivery. And I think without some of the teeth, we're going to struggle to deliver on some of those commitments. But I think importantly, once those objectives are embedded, then it's about how we bring them to life in a way that we can market them both internally and externally to demonstrate the progress that we're making together, and through the tried and trusted approaches around SRM, measuring our progress and making sure we're celebrating the major steps that we take together. Excellent.
And how can procurement teams put their organisation at the forefront of advancing sustainable procurement practices? I guess the mandate is fairly easy in some organisations, and Matt, I assume that you've been given a clear mandate that this sits firmly with procurement, and how also you're going around with setting these science-based targets.
Yeah, I think we wanted to own the challenge. So the company had set out quite an ambitious 5-year strategy, and had hardwired its sustainable goals and objectives into our overall mission. And we wanted to step up and be part of that particular journey. And therefore, we mapped our entire supply chain, and then we set out building a timeline to start to reduce our overall carbon footprint. But we made sure that all of our members of our team encapsulated objectives, captured sustainability into their objectives with specific targets. And more broadly than that, we made it more of a cross-functional challenge. So not only are they procurement objectives, but as Patrick was saying, those objectives sit right across the organization through the work that we're doing from a healthier planet, healthier people target. Ultimately, we want to incorporate sort of sustainable procurement best practice into our DNA, and make sure that we're aligned with standards such as ISO 24000. So I think it's about making objectives, making the process real, embedding those objectives into the things that people do every day, and then holding yourselves accountable for measurable targets and standards.
And Patrick, I think, you know, that the setting the targets, I guess defining what those targets are, how you're going to measure them, it is quite critical really to map success. Tell us about some of the things you do.
Yeah, you know, we've not only used Salesforce technology ourselves, Salesforce Sustainability Cloud, built by my team first and foremost to help ourselves, but then it was such a success that we've brought it to market. And what we continuously do is take the approaches, the findings, the dashboards, the analytics that we find useful internally, and bring that into the product roadmap and get it into the hands of our customers. So one interesting moment in time was that same day that we announced the addition of climate to all procurement contracts going forward, we also announced a functionality called the Scope 3 Hub in Sustainability Cloud, where a procurement team can put in the spend data from the company and convert that very quickly into a quick overview of where the emissions upstream are coming from. And that has been a really helpful tool in prioritization. I think climate action, being in the field of sustainability, trying to drive change, prioritization is one of the biggest challenges there is. And to be at the forefront means to constantly search for those things that'll have truly the greatest impact. Data and context is essential to getting there. And so tools like Sustainability Cloud to give any of our customers a 360-degree view of their emissions, Scope 1, 2, and 3, gives them the tools then to prioritize which areas of the supply chain to push more than others, what sort of things to ask for, and how to create change that's most impactful.
And getting that visibility, I guess, is key to really knowing where to start, where your quick wins are, where your problem areas are as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Jennifer, I wanted to ask you about setting science-based targets as well, and how you can integrate those more into measures.
So I talked before about the relationships between different departments and between procurement professionals. I think you really need that support across the organisation. So the education and the workshops, both within the organisation and outside it. And I mean, we have a clause that you can put into either an employment policy or into a supplier contract, just requiring that employees are educated about climate. So that type of thing. But you also are going to need the support of your board, because these things need to be set at board level. Yeah. So you need to ask for that, so you're getting the support. But alongside that, again, it's this teeth thing. Unless it bites someone's pocket or it's a matter of regulation, if someone's quarterly targets are threatened, it's hard to dislodge that as their primary concern. And so you need to look at what incentives you can use both at board level and elsewhere. So we do have clauses, for example, that kind of link remuneration to climate targets. And then obviously science-based targets into standard form contracts, so that you're putting those climate incentives on a par with profit making with all the people in the chain, and that's basically, nothing shows that you're more serious than that.
Excellent. And in terms of measuring supplier success, Matt, what kind of measures are you using, and how are you tracking suppliers' progress?
So there are tools that exist that can help and we subscribe to EcoVadis. And EcoVadis has enabled us to help sort of define and measure success in specific areas that we've targeted for improvement within our supply chain. So if you focus specifically on scope 3, it's important for us to make sure that we've aligned the targets that we've set with our suppliers' goals and with our goals. And as we go through and work through that together in pursuing, different sustainability initiatives that we've identified together to identify those opportunities for reducing our carbon, that we make sure we do a good job in tracking that and reporting against it. So, it gives us credibility because we're doing what we said we would do, but it also helps the suppliers understand the progress that they're making in not only contributing for us, the contribution they're making for us, but also the contribution that they're making for perhaps even our competitors. And I think this is one space where you need to put the competitive mindset to one side, because I think, if we and our industry peers are all focused on the same thing, the speed of change and the speed at which we're able to measure and report against that is going to be that much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick, would you agree that suppliers are more and more willing to share their success and come on this journey with you? Is that finding it easier to engage with them and share their progress?
Yeah, in ways that I wouldn't even believe if I weren't part of these conversations myself. We always get asked, how did your suppliers take it when you told them climate was part of purchasing agreements going forward? And it has been resoundingly positive, enthusiastic. For every, 99% of the conversations have been about how helpful it is to have a clear signal for the change that that person is trying to execute in their business. We've had companies proactively reach out and say, we're not even up for a contract renewal, but can we sign on to it now and become known as a company that leaned in to join? So the reception has been incredibly positive. It's really great to see. And on the measurement side, just one extra comment. What we don't need is new standards, right? There's this flaw out there in the movement, which is there are so many standards, none of them are good. It's so much chaos. So we are going to invent one more standard to throw into the mix. And it's well intentioned, but it just adds to the chaos in the end. So what we've tried to deliberately do is lean on the Science-Based Targets Initiative, lean on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and advocate for standards that already exist out there.
Yeah.
Me too, like Matt, use EcoVadis for this sort of high-level, broad sustainability metrics and continuous improvement side of things, and then Sustainability Cloud to go deeper into greenhouse gas emissions. And there's a little bit of an art there, and it makes measurement a little bit easier on us, but you also don't want to be too prescriptive. So one of the things we did when we say science-based targets is if a company has their own non-SBTI science-based targets, there's an attestation form that they can fill out to explain the rationale. But pretty much we stop there. We don't want to be the arbiter of what is and is not science-based. That's not our role. But if they can provide an attestation, we figure that has given them enough internally to get comfortable signing something like that they're probably on solid ground.
Excellent. And we've had a question come in, and it's talking. We're talking a lot around contract compliance here with regards to sustainability. But should we be? I mean, Patrick, sorry, right at the beginning when we said, "Are we doing enough?" And the answer is, are you doing the very best you can? What kind of tactics can we put in place to make sure suppliers are doing the very best that we can and are not just responding to what we're putting in contracts in terms of a compliance point of view? What kind of things can we put in place to make sure that suppliers are doing everything that they possibly can and perhaps coming to us with ideas, etc., rather than just responding to what's asked of them? So I don't know if anyone wants to pick that up first.
I think as well as just having the obligations of the contract, you need to have those reporting requirements, and kind of you can ask for emissions reduction targets specifically linked to the contract, but you can also ask for those organizational reporting requirements, and so you can actually make them quite wide. And then I think we've had some ideas in some of our clauses where you actually, I think it was an insurance one, where you actually get the parties talking. So the insurer has to meet with the insured every so often to share ideas about sustainability. So you get that collaborative function. So that can be, I know you said outside contract, but that can be a way of kind of stretching that contract base. And also think about offsetting as well. Not just emissions reduction, but making sure that any offsetting of those emissions is being done responsibly. So following the mitigation hierarchy by reducing emissions before they offset, but then when they do offset, making sure they're permanent with a low risk of reversal, that they're additional, they're like for like in terms of their warming impact and the time scale and durability of the carbon storage. And also really important, quite a lot of offsets out there are just avoiding or reducing other parties' emissions instead of actually removing greenhouse gases. So ideally, you want to, it's stretching that ambition, but you really want to be talking to your contractual partners and saying, how are you offsetting? Have you got a plan to make your offsets more ambitious?
Thanks, Jennifer. Matt, how do you encourage suppliers to come to you with like innovative ideas?
There's a couple of things. So first, we actively engage them in the process, and I think there's a part around reward. So we incentivize our suppliers to do exactly that. And then there's another approach that doesn't get talked about that often, and I also believe that sustainability can lead to productivity, and we've successfully demonstrated a number of innovative ideas that have unlocked value in its broader sense. And then it's about how you engage the suppliers around that. And if you do it on a shared value basis, then they are more inclined to work with you, collaboratively going forward.
And Patrick, we've got another question come through about what happens if you get pushback from a supplier? They're not willing to share their environmental policies or become engaged. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it came up a little bit earlier. Every supplier is going to be on a different part of their own journey. Some big, some small, some entrenched, some trailblazing into the future. And so it's a combination of two things: clearly stating where you want them to go and putting it in contract, putting it with teeth, and also recognizing where they are and trying to close that gap as quickly as possible. And often if you pull too hard on that gap, just like tugging on a rubber band, it'll snap. Yeah. So every interaction is a chance to tug on the rubber band just as much as you can. And that's a lot of that art that I mentioned in terms of supplier relationship and the brilliant people in the procurement team, all of whom we trained on climate and these climate clauses in webinars and with slide decks that they have at their fingertips. So we've equipped them to be, deft at tugging on that rubber band. And then, the other thing is, without a doubt, any company's alignment to climate change is going to be the single biggest determinant of their success over the next decade. So it's not an out there point of view that we feel like companies need to understand their climate context, figure out their biggest risks and opportunities, and start taking action today. That's just good strategy. And we're trying to make that clear to all of our suppliers.
Excellent. And there's another question come through about how far down your supply chain that you go with these incentives. Are you mainly looking at tier one, only looking at tier one, or are you asking your suppliers your tier ones to then filter that down? Who wants to pick that one up? How far down the supply chain can you realistically go with this?
Well, I think.
Do you want me to go first, or Patrick? You
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say. So clearly, for us, we're looking at packaging, ingredients, and other goods and services. So it's the full spectrum
Yeah.
of things that we buy as a business. And as we engage our larger suppliers, there is clearly a willingness now on their part to go, beyond their own supply chain and look at what their tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers are doing as well. I think if we were pursuing this in isolation, we would have a far bigger challenge. But if you look at the industry that I particularly work in, all of the major producers in the industry are all focused on this. So we're all asking exactly the same questions, and therefore now there is a groundswell within the industry, for the suppliers to look, right the way back through their own value chains and and drive their own sustainability agendas.
Yeah, Patrick.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm going to drop in here is we published on Trailhead a lot of our supply chain engagement content that I just mentioned. So I dropped it in the chat there. Please, everyone, have a look, share, provide feedback. This is a collaborative effort, right? And so just like Matt says, we need to come together and help each other. We're after very similar objectives, even spanning different industries. And probably the brightest spot in this line of work is when you meet your counterpart at a different company. Maybe it's a commercial competitor, but you recognize very quickly you're on the same team, you're going after the same goals, and there's a lot of pre-competitive conversation and strategy to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen much of that going on in other sectors, the collaborating at a competitor level across sectors. Yeah, definitely. We had a couple of questions here. Are any of the panelists members or considering joining the B Corp movement, or are there any other initiatives that you're got behind and that you would recommend people joining to find out more information or to get more guidance from?
A few, and I think many of them actually take the form of buyers groups, and it's an important point to just highlight the fact that the customer relationship is just a supplier relationship in reverse, and using your voice as a very vocal customer is really central to moving supply chains forward. By the way, it's one of the reasons I think Salesforce has such a relevant role to play as the customer relationship leader. For everyone out there, your customer is changing. They are demanding more climate action from you in greater and greater specificity and urgency. And so look for those customers that are really raising their hand to say, we need climate action. That's what Salesforce is trying to do with our procurement contracts. And there are groups that are trying to bring that voice together. So the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, for what it means to have really impactful renewable energy strategies. We founded the Business Alliance for Scaling Climate Solutions to explore and define what high quality climate investments, including carbon credit purchases, look like, a lot of the attributes that Jennifer mentioned and more. The Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, the Colo and Cloud Buyers Alliance, all of these things aim to bring together the customer voice for climate action into a single harmonious communication and push supply chains through that. And then there's the Climate Pledge, the Race to Zero, the Trillion Tree, 1T.org, the Trillion Tree movement. So many chances to join in and make your voice even louder.
Jennifer, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I think also that the B Corp movement, I think there's a lot of hoops. I don't know enough about it, but I think there's a lot of hoops to be jumped through to get it. One alternative that companies could look to is actually just one of the things you have to do to get accreditation for that is to change your company's constitution, your governing documents. And so one thing you can do is just change those yourself. So there's a campaign in the UK at the moment to actually change the law to require sustainability in ESG in the company's governing documents. So that's something you can do kind of towards getting that kind of recognition that you're setting that priority at the very top level, and it's then embedded in everything. And again, not just environment and sustainability, but you can go for the social and governance with that as well.
Great, thank you. A few more questions I think we've got time for. How do you establish emissions baselines with your suppliers at the start of the sustainability programs? And I guess for some suppliers, they just wouldn't even know where to start to try and establish where their starting position is. Matt, have you had any experience of helping suppliers?
Yeah, so I think you make a great point. You know, some of the suppliers that we've approached don't know where to begin. So it's back to that word collaboration. It's about working with them and helping them how to measure their carbon footprint and helping to point out things that they could be focusing on to drive reduction and start the journey.
And should we be picking which suppliers we are and aren't doing this with, or should there be some kind of light touch even with transactional suppliers? So somebody has put that, have you found more success with longer term contracts? And which I'd imagine the answer is yes, but is there a space or is there an incentive or some kind of tracking for more transactional suppliers? And then how do you get those to engage too? Patrick, have you got a response on that?
Yeah, you know, the theme of it is we didn't ever want to create a new process for the procurement team to, you know, do their day job here and then do their sustainability job after hours over here. Yeah. And so merging our climate action desire, the climate contracts, and the process to create change into the procurement relationship process was absolutely critical. And within the field of supplier engagement procurement, like this audience knows even better than me, you have different levels of prioritization and focus. And for a mission critical, long-standing, trusted tier 1 supplier, you're meeting regularly, you're talking about a lot of different factors, and we've of course got climate front and center within those conversations. For the long tail, the smaller suppliers, more transactional, there really aren't as many deep, frequent touch points. So the level of time and effort spent is going to vary just along the same ways that it varies in general in procurement and supply chain engagement.
Absolutely. And Jennifer, I wonder if you could help with this question. With all different organizations that you're working with, are there any particular sectors or markets that are standing out to be really leading the way in terms of this that people could look to for, other than our brilliant examples here today, obviously, that can look to learn more from? So I think we're learning from others is definitely the way to go.
I mean, we're still very much in the early stages of hearing back how our clauses are being used, and this is a struggle for us, and that's why we were so pleased to get that case study from Salesforce, which you can see on our website, and we do actually have a few other case studies. So I wouldn't say they're not going to be the sectors that are doing the best, it's just the ones we've heard about. So for example, we've got 2 law firms on there. We've got the UK Environment Agency on there, and we've got 2 legal services providers who provide model clauses, and so they're embedding them within the clauses that they provide to legal professionals. So but that's literally a handful of case studies that we've heard about, and also we're still working on a lot of them that we're kind of getting permission to talk about, which is another thing, because you have to get that confidentiality and work out what you're going to say about it. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to publish a lot more, and you're going to be able to start seeing the sectors that are doing well. But I would imagine it's all about low-hanging fruit, isn't it? If you talk about professional services firms who have less kind of scope 1 and 2 emissions, it's going to be easier in a lot of ways than the really carbon intensive sectors that still we are starting to get some engagement from the oil and gas industry, actually. So who knows? It's not visible yet. I would love to know the answer to that question myself. The real estate industry actually has responded quite well as well.
And I guess we can learn from others, but it's about tailoring it to your specific organisation and in your sector, most definitely. Great stuff. There was a question through from Matt. Can you explain a bit more about the type of incentives that you've put in place in your supply chain? I think that was when we were talking about encouraging people to come forward with ideas, perhaps.
Yeah, very simplistically, we've linked volume awards to progress in delivering against sustainability commitments that we have built into our agreement. So for those suppliers that are best able to demonstrate and deliver on those commitments, we will reward them with a greater share of our volume.
Excellent. And I think finally, because we've got through quite a lot of questions and we're rapidly running out of time. So I just wanted to go around the panel just quickly, and if you could share one top tip with our audience today on how to make a successful rollout into incorporating sustainability into their contracts. So Jennifer, do you want to go first?
Sure. So one thing to remember when you're arguing for the use of climate clauses in your contract is to strike this balance between climate ambition that refers to these recognised standards and measuring and reporting, and also commercial realism. And in particular, explain why climate ambition is commercially realistic. So you need to counter that argument that climate clauses will increase the price of a contract. So climate change is not a 10-year problem or even tomorrow's problem. Every day now, there are extreme weather events which are X% more likely to occur or X% worse because of climate change. So instead of hiding those costs in what's known as the force majeure clauses, businesses should calculate them because climate change is costing them every day. So if a flood knocks out your supplier's factory for 2 weeks, and then this triggers a penalty clause for late delivery in a contract with your customer, if that flood was 30% more likely due to climate change, then say that 30% of the penalty was a climate change cost. Then if you calculate that for the last 2 to 5 years, especially since it's suggested that there'll be an increase in global pandemics due to a loss of biodiversity, so these figures could include COVID losses. If you calculate that, once you've got those figures, then you can calculate what you're willing to pay to make a contract less carbon intensive or more resilient. And then it's a commercial cost, not just a climate change sustainability compliance issue. And of course, the idea of increased costs in the abstract does sound like a hard sell. So instead, you can frame it as these costs delivering a return on investment for the climate costs you would have incurred in 10 years that will be higher than the ones you incurred over the last 2 to 5 years because things are getting progressively worse. So sell it in a risk-based way, in a commercial way, rather than it, I think, as Patrick said, rather than being a separate thing outside of commercial considerations.
Absolutely. A lot of it just makes good business sense. Like, why wouldn't you do this? Matt, how about you? What's your last tip for our audience?
Yeah, I think very simplistically, make your sustainability deliverables as important as your value creation deliverables. Equal weighting.
Thank you very much. And final word from you, Patrick. What's your top tip?
I won't duplicate the brilliant words Jennifer shared and Matt's brilliant advice as well. So I'll build on what Matt said. Beyond incentives and targets, make your climate data look like the quality of your financial data. Make it comprehensive, have it span scope 1, 2, and 3. By the way, we've got some tools that we think can help you in doing that. And the mission of that Sustainability Cloud product is impact, not profit. So it truly is a gesture to try to use our superpower to help. But if you can have high quality, timely, trusted climate data, then the pathways to delivering true impact become clearer and clearer. And then finally, don't do it yourself. Reach out to Jennifer, Matt, me, get in touch with the Chancery Lane Project, communicate with each other here that you're seeing in the chat on this. We are in this together, and there's no time to duplicate the creation of things from scratch. We need to build on each other's work, quite fast.
Excellent advice. Thank you very much. Jennifer, Matt, Patrick, thank you for such a rich conversation. That was excellent. And thank you for everyone's great recovery on our technical glitch there. So thanks for making it back on and joining us again, and for our speakers for picking up where we left off. That draws our webinar to a close today. There are some great links in the chat, so make sure you scroll back and find all of those links from Chancery Lane project and also from Salesforce on those tools and products and things and case studies that they mentioned there. Like I said, we've recorded this session today, so it'll be available for you to watch back on demand, and we'll send you the link to that recording once it's ready, probably next week now. So all remains is a massive thank you again to our panelists, and thanks for joining us, and see you again next time.